Hey guys, welcome back to the sports show. I'm Joe. He's Corey. Let's get into let's stop everything. Let's just get into the biggest thing that happened last week. Did the Jets tank on going zero coverage with 5 seconds left against the Raiders to lose 31-28? What did Greg Williams do? Why did he do that? Corey, please.
I don't see any logical reason to do that other than to try to lose the game. I mean, you don't, in an obvious Hail Mary situation like that, there's no way you send your cornerbacks that aren't good into single coverage with no safety help. It makes no sense. I saw a stat that since they started tracking it in 2006, that was the first time somebody in a situation with less than 30 seconds up 4 to 6 points did that. It makes no sense. A veteran of the league like Greg Williams, as aggressive as he has been in his history, definitely knows better than to do that. And whether you say he was trying to get Adam Gase fired, like I've heard, or he was just completely trying to tank so they get the number 1 pick, I think it had something to do with Trevor Lawrence there. And I think it's worth at least investigating if you're the NFL.
See, I want to agree that they purposely did that so they could tank and stuff, but you said it, like Greg Williams is an aggressive defensive coordinator and stuff, and I was just thinking, you know what? Obviously, the Raiders wouldn't expect zero coverage because it's like the first time since 2006 that someone tried that. So maybe he was just trying to catch Gruden by surprise and stuff. But they have Henry Ruggs, who's fast as hell, and then the Jets playing a junior varsity defense. It's not like that doesn't match up. It doesn't match up at all. I don't think he was trying to do that to tank for Trevor, but I'll just believe it just because it's just, I'd rather believe that than, him actually thinking I'll catch John Gruden off. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's Trevor Lawrence, and it's something some teams might do some different things for him. He's not like any other prospect, any of the typical prospects, so they might really try to lose and make it that obvious, but we'll see.
I guess eventually they have to win, right? They're at the end of the day, they're a professional football team. They're not built to accept losing. They have to win at some point, right? But who's been winning? My New York Football Giants. They just beat the Seahawks. They're on a 4-game winning streak now, 5-7, top of the NFC East at 5-7. But the Washington football team's also 5-7. They just beat the undefeated Steelers, which I was happy because the Steelers finally lost, and I know a lot of Steelers fans, but I was also sad because now Washington's 5-7, so but we have the tiebreaker because we swept them over the season. But I'm really happy how the Giants are doing. Their defense is crazy. Somehow Colt McCoy and Wayne Gallman are doing well for the past couple weeks and stuff. So before I give my opinion, how do you think the rest of the season is going to turn out for both Washington and the Giants?
They both have relatively difficult schedules besides, of course, Week 17 when they play the NFC East. All winning teams on the schedules except for one. Well, and the 49ers for Washington, but I think they're one of the better teams that are under 500. There's one team on both of their schedules besides the NFC East that I see is a game that they should win. It's Washington against Carolina, and that's a Week 16 game. I think at that point we'll have a better idea, but I think that could be the game that separates the two, that breaks the tie, and Washington comes out winning the division because I think they have the better team right now. No offense. I think their defense, led by that loaded front seven with Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Ryan Kerrigan, and they have a suitable secondary that could also, do its job. I think led by that defense, they could win this division. That might be the worst division in NFL history.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on the point where this is the worst division in NFL history.
Only 2 losing records have ever made the playoffs, and they both won playoff games. So there's hope for you, Joe.
Yeah, there's hope. There's hope.
Yeah, I think it's better because you're 5-7 now, and that's a lot better than 3-7. Like both those teams were 2 weeks ago. It looked like a 5-win season might actually win the division, but now it's looking more like 6 or 7 wins, and that's more respectable. Although it's definitely not expected.
Yeah, I really hope the Giants can pull out a win against either Arizona or Cleveland or both. Because I know we're gonna lose against Baltimore, but I hope that out of these 4 weeks we can go 3-1, 2-2, and hopefully Washington goes 1-3 somehow.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of unknowns still with these two teams because they've been overlooked all season. They could pull off an upset at any point, really, in the last 4 weeks. So it may come down to that tiebreaker where the Giants have it. But obviously, we saw they just pulled off 2 upsets. Washington just beat Pittsburgh. And I asked you, do you think Pittsburgh can recover against possibly their hardest game this season at Buffalo? Buffalo's looked hot, and they just came off a big primetime win against the 49ers. Do you think the Steelers bounce back this week, and why?
All right. So, like I said, I have a lot of Steelers friends that are Steelers fans, and I don't really like the Steelers as much, but they are 11-1, relatively easy schedule, but they're a great football team. Josh Allen, I think this year gives him enough credibility to act like he's an elite quarterback. I feel like depending on what happens the last 4 games, and if they make like a playoff run somehow, I think people can say like, Josh Allen is almost there. Like he's not like a top 5, top 6 quarterback, but he could definitely stay in that top 10 NFL quarterbacks for a few years. And then Stephon Diggs is probably top 5 wide receiver in the league. Cole Beasley is almost at 800 yards receiving at 31 years old. Like Diggs and Beasley is a great 1-2, surprisingly great 1-2 punch for Josh Allen. So I want to say the Bills can pull it off, but I don't know. It depends on how the Steelers come out in those initial first drives. So how about you, Corey?
Yeah, surprisingly, I believe the Bills are favored by about 2.5 points right now. So Josh Allen's definitely becoming a star. His mobility has always scared me just by the fact that he's deceptively quick, and his arm talent is coming around. So you made a lot of good points about him, and the receiving core is certainly helping him out there. But I just don't see the Steelers team, after starting 11-0, dropping 2 straight. They still have that really, really good defense, probably the best in the league, and they still have, watching on Tuesday or on Monday afternoon, it was seeing that offense, the weapons they have, although they didn't score a lot, Ben has so many options. Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, James Washington, Eric Ebron. I think he has enough options there, and I think the defense will find a way to stop Josh Allen like they stopped Lamar Jackson. And I see Mike Tomlin leading that team to 12-1 record.
Like, I knew he had weapons, but I didn't know it was that. I just deeped every single person, mentally went through all of their highlights on the season. I didn't know, I really didn't know that they had that many weapons like that.
And it's like the Steelers always have a lot of good receivers. Speaking of, I'll go into my fantasy player this week. We talked about Steelers receivers last time, but there's one that's been consistent throughout the entire season. It's Deontay Johnson. He's been incredible since returning from injuries, had only 1 game under 6 receptions. That's a lot of receptions, and he's only had 1. Consistently gets at least 15 to 25 points.
Yeah, Deontay Johnson is a scary good player. Like you said, the Steelers always have a third option somewhere, and I feel like he's one of the greater third options in the NFL. And on the subject of wide receivers, my fantasy player for that matchup, I mentioned him before, Cole Beasley. He was a good player. He was the Deontay Johnson of the Cowboys when he was with the Cowboys. And this year, out of nowhere, almost 800 yards in the league. I think that's top 20 in the league as of right now. And then he's also top 20 in the league for PPR points per game, which is about 15. I think it's 14.7. And that's 19th in the league, 19th best wide receiver in the league. And I wouldn't expect that out of someone of Cole Beasley.
We've seen teams give Diggs more attention, and Allen likes to turn to Beasley. He had a great game Monday Night Football, so wouldn't surprise me if, they need a touchdown in the red zone, they go to Cole Beasley. So who else do you have in your fantasy picks this week? We do fantasy picks every time we're on this show, so who else do you have for a player to start this week?
This is a very important week for fantasy owners, because this is either the first week of your playoffs or I think the last week of the regular season for some teams.
Yeah, so hopefully we don't ruin your playoffs.
Yeah. So for the first person I'm going to go with Dalvin Cook, the Vikings running back, of course. He's playing the Buccaneers, and the Buccaneers have also a scary good defense, like all the other, most of the teams that we covered for this week. They allowed the least yards per carry, and I think it's like 3.3 yards, which is tied with the Saints, and then they've allowed less than 900 yards for the season, which is least in the league and stuff. And it's just going to be an interesting matchup for Dalvin Cook. Like, when I look at fantasy players, at least to cover for the show, I don't look at, who I think is going to go off. I think it's like, how are they going to respond to such a difficult matchup? And I think this is one of the most difficult matchups that I see for this week. Dalvin Cook against the Bucks defense. So, Corey, who do you have?
Yeah, if you're doubting starting Dalvin Cook because of that Bucks defense, you shouldn't be, because he's just so good. And go ahead and start him. I have another NFC North running back. I have David Montgomery. He's another guy that's coming off of an injury like Deontay Johnson, who I mentioned earlier. And since that injury, he's scored 25.3 and 27.1 PPR fantasy points, those 2 games, which I believe would make him the best running back in fantasy over those last 2 weeks. And he's going up against the 31st best running defense in the league with the Texans when it comes to fantasy points allowed to running backs. And I think he's got to be a guy you start here, with everything I just mentioned, the consistent production and the workload he's receiving in Chicago with that matchup. He's an automatic start, I think.
Yeah, Montgomery's been good for the Bears the past couple weeks. It's definitely going to be a good matchup for him. And if you have Montgomery on your team, I highly suggest starting. I think I'm playing against him this week, so I hope that he doesn't do well. But like, for everybody else's sake, let's hope he has a good game. So the other player that I want to look at is someone that doesn't really have a difficult matchup, but I mean, I don't know if he's gonna have a difficult matchup. DeAndre Hopkins, obviously, probably top 2, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. He's going up against my Giants, and Patrick Graham, the Giants defensive coordinator, has the Giants playing great defense. James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, Leonard Williams, all three levels of their defense doing great. It's definitely like, who did the Giants shut down last week? Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf to 12 points, and Chris Carson. If the Giants defense doesn't produce the magic that they've done for the past couple weeks, I think it's going to be a good game for D-Hop. But if they continue on this streak that they're having, I think D-Hop's not going to have. I think D-Hop's going to have a good game, but I don't think it's going to be a D-Hop quality game for what people are expecting. So if you have him, I would start him. And if you don't, just hope for the best.
And for me, I'm going with his former teammate, a Texan, and it's Kiki Kuti. He's receiving a lot more targets now just because of all the injuries that the Texans have faced. They lost Will Fuller to suspension, not an injury, but they lost Randall Cobb to injury. Brandon Cooks got hurt, although he's expected to play this week. And they cut Kenny Stills. Those are all the guys that were Deshaun Watson's favorite targets at the beginning of the season. Now I look to Kiki Kuti to step up. He got 22.1 fantasy points last week when, Cook still played half that game. And I think if you're looking for somebody to throw in there to win your fantasy matchup in a very important Week 14, I think he's the guy to throw in there. Even though the Bears are a good defensive team, he's got to get some targets because Deshaun doesn't have many options. So I'd say throw him in your starting lineups if you're wondering.
Yeah, I guess the lack of targets is really the reason why Deshaun cried on the sideline when they lost to the Colts this weekend. I really feel bad for the guy. Great quarterback, but just he's on the team that isn't really helping him out this much. But yeah, no.
Terrible timing in the way they lost Will Fuller right after cutting Kenny Stills. I mean,
yeah,
can't get anything going.
Speaking of fantasy, I was actually going to trade for Will Fuller, but then that got sidelined, so that got moved to a different trade. So I was very happy that I didn't trade for him because I did give up a lot in my trade.
Yeah.
So yeah. So those are the fantasy players that we have. Those are the picks and predictions that we have for this week. If you have, any opposing thoughts, just put in the comments or whatever. If you have our Instagrams, put it DM us on Instagram if you have any opposing comments. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you guys soon.